Hello, welcome to our conversation today with Corey Harrison. I'm Brian. I'm a partner at the Berkeley SkyDeck Fund, a active venture capital investment fund based in Silicon Valley. And we're here today to talk about some of the developments in AI. So just to kick things off, Corey, would love to learn more about your background, and how you started Flip AI.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and nice to meet you. Really glad to be here. So I'm Corey Harrison, CEO, co-founder of Flip AI. We are based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. We're also based out of Bangalore, India. We provide what we call observability intelligence software. So we have our own suite of um, large language models that we built on our own. We have an orchestration layer that we built on our own, and an entire product that basically sits on top of any observability data source. You could think uh, popular tools that many developers use, SREs and DevOps professionals use globally. And our models and our platform is really about connecting different modalities of observability data. So that could be logs, which are almost like text messages between applications. They could be metrics, which are more numbers and time series based data, traces, which are kind of graphical data, code configuration files, et cetera. So our models can read and interpret all those data points, and they can tell you exactly what's going on if there's an incident. So if there's a production incident, if there's an application that goes down, a service that goes down, typically there's a hardworking team of site reliability engineers or developers that are behind the scenes trying to troubleshoot and trying to understand what's going on as fast as they can. Our models automate that entire process. We've been at this for about 3 years. We're backed by quite a few investors out of the Silicon Valley, out of the Bay Area, and also out of New York, including several, including Morgan Stanley and a few other very large banks, including SEB as well. One of our big investors, and we love what we do. My path here before this, I mostly worked in enterprise technology and operations. For about 20 years, I've worked at companies like Johnson and Johnson. I worked in the White House, in the federal government, where I started what's now the Chief Digital and AI Office of the Department of Defense. I helped start that team. I also worked at the National Football League before starting Flip. So very diverse background of experiences, but mostly large companies. So typically large enterprises, complex places, hard applications, and challenging environments to improve from an application performance perspective.
Amazing, yeah, amazing background, and glad you made that jump into the founder journey. I'm sure it's one of the harder challenges you had to tackle in your career.
Totally.
Well, let's talk a little bit about observability. You've said in the past that observability is broken. Can you walk us through what led you to this conclusion, and what traditional observability approaches failed and kind of fell short of what you thought would be relevant for the market?
Yeah, so observability is a large space. There are quite a few what we call incumbents or larger companies that have been around for a while, and there's always a new crop of startups that are coming around. My co-founders and I, we all come from large environments. So our CTO, Sunil Malaya, he's from AWS. He used to run what was known then as Amazon Comprehend, which is the largest NLP service in the world when he was there. So not only is he an expert in NLP or Gen AI now, he's also an expert in large systems. So Amazon Comprehend was a top tier service for AWS, and Sunil ran that service to 5 nines of availability, et cetera. My background being in the federal government, when I worked there were several large systems that were under our team's purview, including systems that help service members and their families travel. We worked on a system that helps veterans get their benefits, et cetera. So these are large, complex systems with millions of constituents, tons of complexity behind the scenes. And the reason why we said traditional observability is broken is many, 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 many years ago, even just having logs and displaying it in a system like Splunk was a good thing, right? That was the innovation back then, just being able to see all your logs in one place and to analyze them in a tool like Splunk or Datadog, et cetera. What's happened over time is applications have become more complex, right? So there's a ton of complexity now, environments. Many of our customers at Flip have hundreds of microservices, sometimes thousands of microservices that are all talking to each other, et cetera, right? So there's a lot of complexity there. Teams are more distributed now than ever, right? So whether it's working remotely, et cetera, it's very common to have teams that are not sitting in the same room anymore. So you're trying to troubleshoot an incident, you're trying to coordinate across different teams in different locations in different geographies. And then also, I think the interesting thing is, many of the premise of the current observability tools is largely predicated upon the fact that upon the assumption that the systems and tools are directly instrumented at the beginning anyway, right? So what we find is that logs, most of our customers tend to have logs, right? So they have logs kind of going into an observability tool. Sometimes they have logs going into a non-trib data store. Sometimes they have traces enabled, right? So
Mm.
traces, remember that's kind of like graphical data. Sometimes they have traces data, sometimes they don't, right? And traces themselves can be pretty incomplete. And you could be missing spans, et cetera. So like, while, if you have 100% tracing, great, right? But most of our customers tend not to have that, right? And then, when we get the metrics, code, et cetera, right? So what we're seeing is that because of the complexity of today's systems, the complexity of the teams themselves, it's also showing up in terms of the complexity of the data, right? And trying to get access to it. And the fact that it's not all in one place anymore, the fact that it's in different places, the fact that there are different modalities. And the net result of that is whenever there's an incident at a large place, there are typically teams that are trying to correlate data across multiple systems, teams, modalities, et cetera. And you're trying to do that. And now I would argue that the stakes are higher than ever, right? Like we're more reliant on software than we ever were, right? So it's almost like a perfect storm of challenges for today's SRE teams. And then the net result of that is mean time to resolve, or MTTR, which is the metric that we care about, one of the metrics we care about the most in our space. It could tend to be a couple hours for some of our customers,
Mm.
right? And if you're dealing with customer facing, revenue impacting applications, every minute matters. It matters to the bottom line.
That makes a lot of sense. One thing that you mentioned that kind of just got me thinking, what your first kind of areas you mentioned around why observability matters is around the growth of microservices. And I know maybe in the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of pushback, I think, in a lot of industries around, hey, these microservice architectures is very complicated to track and follow. And I'm kind of just curious, as AI, agents grow, as AI engineering becomes more popular and engineering with AI, is that going to lead to even more microservices? I don't know, where do you kind of see the growth of microservices happening right now, which seems kind of core to Flip AI and some of the pain points you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so we live in a microservice powered world in a lot of cases for us, right? Now, many of our customers are also pretty large, kind of established enterprises. So sometimes they'll tend to have some monolithic applications and environments, but for most part, like we tend to gravitate towards microservices here at Flip. I do think that microservices are great, but I do think, to your point, they introduce complexity to your environment, and they're kind of hard to troubleshoot. And I can see, and we've seen in some cases, even with some of our customers, that because they have a Flip there, they're more comfortable deploying even more microservices, right? Because we have our platform, our agents out there that are analyzing microservices and performance and looking at the error logs and application logs, right? Like you feel like you can actually tackle more. So I think the thing for us with Flip especially when we started early on, it's not necessarily, we never like, hey, we're gonna replace your team, right? Like that's not why we're here. Your team is doing a great job. They have tons of institutional knowledge that your company needs. We're here to help you do more with the same people, or more with less, right? So I like to say that we like to abstract some of that complexity out of our customers' hands so that they could take on more. So I do think with the advent of platforms like Flip, some of these other kind of like agentic startups out there, et cetera, I do think we're going to see a growth in more microservices, and therefore like a growth in more complexity, which necessitates the need for products like Flip. So it's almost like it's like a virtuous cycle, right?
For
That we
sure.
see. Yeah.
Venture loves very virtuous cycles. About that. Well, yeah, I mean, drawing upon some of your experience, in the past, building, inside the Pentagon, now into the private sector, how do you notice that these kind of observability requirements differ between the government, and maybe more enterprise AI agent deployments? What are some pluses and minuses from each approach, and kind of what do you see as those differences?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there. So I'll start with private sector first. Private sector can move faster. right? That's something that we've seen. There's a larger degree. There are many more degrees of freedom to experiment depending on the company's focus. I would say that maybe probably less so for a large established bank, but like if you're a startup in the Bay Area or a growth stage technology company, you're able to experiment and do a lot, right? And in those environments, they are typically, because they're innovators themselves, they're typically open to trying new tools faster and things like that, right? So in those instances, the site reliability engineers or the DevOps folks tend to have more flexibility in terms of trying new tools. So that's one thing I'll call out. I think the thing about the government is, uh, you're dealing with scale. You're dealing with like a massive scale. One of the projects that we worked on when I was at the Defense Digital Service was a defense travel system. Service members and their families use it to travel. That's millions of people, right? Millions of people that use this system to travel, right? So this is it's mission critical. So the stakes are really high. You may not want to move fast with that one, right? You may not want to try every new tool. You may want to see some things that are proven out first for a little while. Also with tools like that, they tend to be very bespoke, right? I think one of the challenges that I think that AI startups face is you're largely training on, your differentiation. One of your differentiators is going to be in the data set that you're training on. If you're a company like Flip and we're a log first company, so our model's first language is logs, I like to say. We've created our own environments. We've written a paper about our training environment that we built that simulates customers, et cetera. And we're really good at finding data and generating data that's as close to production data as possible. That matters. The challenge with the government is they may be using systems and in some cases languages that we just haven't seen in the wild. We haven't seen in the public sector, in the private sector, and therefore we can't necessarily train on it, right? So I think that that's another challenge that we face if you're trying to service government. Another thing I would just say is, I think while I said that private sector companies tend to move faster, that doesn't necessarily mean that the government is slow. The team I built at the DoD was one of the first teams in the Pentagon to use Slack, for example. There are certain rights that and policies that you can use to move quickly. And I would also argue that like the people there that are, in some cases putting their lives on the line, et cetera, like they want change, solutions, and innovation as bad as anyone does. There just may be a couple of extra checks there, but it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to take years for something to get done there. So those are some of the differences I'll call out. I love our team's experience. So our team has experience on both sides, so private and public sector knowledge. I do think that's helpful to us because as we built Flip, one of the things that we wanted to do right out the bat when we started the company was we knew we wanted to go after enterprises. We knew we wanted to service complexity. We knew we wanted to sell into the Fortune 50, Fortune 100, et cetera. And because of that, there were certain decisions that we made early on. Like from day one, we wanted to make sure that we were in what we call enterprise ready. In other words, we had the right data governance and controls in Flip from day one. Our models, we can actually ship Flip on premise, right? So our models can operate and our platform can operate in a customer's VPC, for example, completely autonomously without us seeing anything from the outside, while giving the customer complete control of the data, the flows. There are no internet calls going outside of your environment, et cetera. So we learned a lot of that stuff. I learned a lot of stuff personally by working in the federal government and seeing the compliance and the controls that were needed. And I wanted to make sure that Flip provided that type of control and security to customers when we were targeting Fortune 500.
That makes a lot of sense for sure. Thanks for sharing a little bit about that. Looking more about your specific, product and, one of the key values we see is this kind of in the future, at least, or even now, predicting incidents and doing this sort of root cause analysis very quickly. How does this real-time capability change how enterprises can manage software reliability and manage their performance?
Yeah, so you go from opening up Slack to seeing that there is an alert, right? And querying it, and you're trying to reach this person's on vacation, or maybe they're in a different time zone, and the war room and all that stuff. You go from that world to you open up Slack and Flip has already debugged an incident for you, right? Like that's the reality of today. That's what we deliver to customers today. And these are not superficial root cause analysis. We're talking very detailed root cause analysis where our models give you what they believe is the issue. And the model also gives you complete explainability. So it gives you the exact path that the model used to get to that answer. It's going to give you the queries that it's run. It's going to give you sample data. It's going to walk you through that entire analysis the same way a junior developer or a junior SRE would. And it's going to give you that in, less than a minute, less than 2 minutes in some cases. It really depends on the environment. That's the reality that we deliver to our customers now. So you're not starting with a question anymore. You're starting with the answer, right? And you can delve into it and go as you like. When we get into the world of prediction and automation, that's where things really get excited, right? Get exciting. Imagine being able to, if you're a large media company, right, and you're trying to simulate traffic on a big event. Maybe there's a live event that you're streaming and you're trying to simulate traffic. And imagine being able to identify infrastructure breaking points based on the number of subscribers or people who join a live stream, right? Like you can get into that kind of scenario analysis. Imagine being able to have our models monitor your environment, identify an issue, identify the fix of the issue, send it to you for approval to keep the human in the loop, and then automating that fix immediately, right? That's the world that we're going to, right? I do think that, if I kind of put on my really, really future hat, I always think of it as almost like autonomous driving, right? Like autonomous driving is great now, but it wasn't always like that, right? Like there are certain things that the industry had to provide to us consumers and users of our autonomous vehicles and EVs, et cetera, to gain trust, right? So for us, the first step was, can we show you detailed root cause analysis and can we do it accurately? The answer is yes. The next step is, can we start to predict incidents? Yes. Now, next is, can we help you start automating some of this stuff? And then eventually in the future, we hope that you would be comfortable even handing off entire parts of your infrastructure to Flip to manage, right? So we're not there yet, right? So we're not there yet, but the vision of starting with root cause analysis, moving to prediction, and then moving to automation, those are the steps that we see to get us there.
Oh, it's an exciting future, I'm sure. A lot more sleep for many infrastructure teams. Who
Yeah,
hate their
yes.
pagers. Yeah, they can
Exactly.
finally enjoy dinner and a bit more at peace. Seeing some of that firsthand. Um, let's talk about the future of observability. With standardization efforts like open telemetry beginning to address AI instrumentation, how do you see the landscape evolving over the next 2 to 3 years for this industry?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I do think we're going to be leading a lot of the prediction and automation work. Same way we were kind of leading in the root cause analysis world. When we first started circling around this use case, we realized that there was an entire generation of tools that were broadly branded as AI ops at the time, and there were quite a few customers that kind of felt that those tools did not deliver the promise, right? I think that's why we were really, really insistent that we provided detailed root cause analysis and that our stuff just like worked. Before we got into the cool stuff, the automation and prediction, we're like, can we give you a detailed root cause analysis and have it be accurate and detailed? And can we do that very, very quickly? So that's kind of where we started. So I do think the reason I bring that is because I think we're going to be the ones, at least in our space, that are kind of ushering in some of this change. I do think other things that are kind of going to pop up. I do think you're going to see a lot more around monitoring agents themselves, right? I think that's the new world. We're jumping into some of that with our customers now. But as we see more and more agents deployed, we're going to want to monitor like we would any other piece of software or any other component, right? We're going to want to understand and be able to trace everything from the initial prompt to the final response. We want to probably monitor individual LLM calls, right, handoffs, guardrails, et cetera. So this just increases the surface area of things that need to be monitored, right? And Flip and other companies and tools are out there actively building onto their platform so they can provide that kind of monitoring as well. But I do think it's going to be important. I don't want to. The one thing I do want to call out is that within the different modalities of telemetry, observability data, we have logs, metrics, and traces, et cetera. Our team at Flip, we strongly believe that, if we had to pick one, we don't like it. We love to have all modalities available. The more modalities available to our models, the more data, the better. The faster we can work, et cetera. But if you had to choose just one modality of data, like an atomic unit, logs, right? Like
Mm.
traces are cool, right? Traces are amazing when everything is instrumented properly and 100%. This is rarely the case with most of our customers. Most of our customers and most of the companies that we talk to do not have tracing 100% enabled, right? That's just a fact, right? Like at least the customers that we've spoken to, and we've spoken to quite a few Fortune 500 companies. The reason I bring that up is because I do think that at a minimum, I would encourage teams to capture logs and store them somewhere, right? Like if we can get to the logs, we can get to the answer. Even with the advent of agents, and I see that like OpenAI's SDK for their agents SDK, for example, has tracing enabled by default. Awesome, right? Hopefully people are using that. We can easily connect to those traces and do our analysis like we would anywhere else. What I would encourage teams to do is if you're not using something that has tracing enabled by default for building out your agents, please at least make sure that you're capturing and gathering logs somewhere. What we found is that even in my background, even when we were at the Department of Defense, et cetera, right? So when all the fancy observability tools fail or fall short or something goes down, the answer is usually somewhere in those logs. Like that is the atomic unit of debugging, in my opinion, in our company's opinion. So I would say, like, by all means, and I would love to see folks continue to focus on capturing at least logs, and then we can be able to predict and analyze incidents based on that.
Makes a ton of sense. And for those same enterprise leaders that, you're talking about, I'm talking to already and would love to work with, maybe folks who are planning deployments in 2025 or soon to be 2026. Once they kind of start tracking those logs, where do they prioritize from there? What is their kind of next big step after kind of log
Yeah.
tracking, log tracing?
Yeah, so I think if you have your logs centralized and decent place, I do think tracing after that makes sense. I wouldn't just do pure tracing because again, like sometimes spans are incomplete, right? So I think that's the one thing we have to call out and just be careful of. I do think that you can start to layer on some of the other modalities of data, and I do think a tool like Flip makes sense, right? If you're someone that is cost conscious, right, you may also want to start to experiment with putting your logs, metrics, and traces in other sources, right? So you see people that are moving some of their data into object data stores, like things like S3 buckets, et cetera, and then, layering on Athena and then like, maybe, using some sort of OTel tools on top of that, right? So I think we see, because of the cost, right? Observability is typically, one of the more expensive line items on the CIO's budget, right? It's typically like cloud computing, just kind of probably like now it's like compute if you're building models, et cetera. And then like probably under there, maybe top five is going to be observability in terms of cost.
Mm.
So it's something that's top of mind for folks, right? And I would say like I would also encourage them to experiment with some of the cheaper, whether it's like cold storage data methods, et cetera. You don't necessarily need with a tool like Flip. We don't care where you put your logs. You can put your logs into one of the incumbent tools out there. You can put your logs into S3. We don't matter. It doesn't matter to us. We'll connect your logs wherever you are, wherever you want them. And with that, we think frees up enterprises to start to drop some of that cost, right? That's typically associated with some of these larger incumbent tools.
Makes sense. What are some other interesting kind of cost optimization methods you might be seeing for observability? And it's very expensive, as you're flagging. Maybe not very expensive, but one of the costs that a CTO thinks about. What are other ways folks can optimize outside of cold storage?
Yeah. So I think I do think that with Flip, you don't have to put all your data in one tool. So if it's helpful. So first, I do think kind of the cold storage thing. If you want to take all your data and all your logs and stick them in an S3 bucket instead of using an incumbent, and then you want Flip to query that bucket, we could totally do that. Perfectly fine, easy. in addition to kind of the storage piece, I do think if folks want to, there are cheaper types of tools out there that are more kind of specialized in nature. So if an enterprise wants to take some of their data out of like this big incumbent and kind of piecemeal and put in different providers, they can do that just to try to save on some costs. That's one thing that they could do. Now, before Flip, I would say the challenge of that is that you introduced fragmentation into your environment, and yet more data sources that your developers have to query and SREs have to query whenever there's an incident. But Flip can connect to that stuff easily, right? Like we could do it. We could just do it right out of the box for you. Um, those are probably the biggest things I would say. And I think outside of that, I do think tools like Flip, right? Tools that have a small, I think on the AI side, the one thing I'll call out is, especially if you're going on-prem, you got to have tools that are optimized so that you're not just like, you don't need a fleet of GPUs to run observability intelligence software, right? That's something else that we've optimized for. So you can Flip on GPU, two GPUs, right? Like probably something smaller than that, right? Like we don't need a lot. Like our models are pretty small, and our team is really, really good at, maybe it's because most of us are ex Amazon Comprehend, but we're really good at making Flip digestible for your average enterprise. So I would say like as you start to bring in these other tools, especially some of the other AI SRE tools, et cetera, just making sure that like, if you're going to run that stuff on-prem, make sure it works, right? I know it sounds like a very obvious statement, but like not as many of them work as you think they would on-prem, or at least as they claim. And then B, just making sure that the footprint is manageable.
Makes a lot of sense. So I think we have time for two more questions. So I'll start off with, as you've been going to market, as you look over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, really what are these first few industries that you see as kind of being the first adopters, or maybe not first, but early adopters of observability? Like who needs this the most out of the, current software engineering teams out there? Is it financial services companies or healthcare companies? Like what do you see as kind of these first adopters due to their kind of large amount of pain points?
Yeah, so we've seen the most traction and most interest in a handful of industries. Uh, they tend to have a pretty significant spin on observability. They tend to have environments that are heterogeneous in nature, right? So very kind of diverse environments. Many of them have microservices, like hundreds of microservices, sometimes thousands. They tend to be large banks, right? So we've had a good amount of traction with large banks, also with media and streaming, and then some larger B2B SaaS providers. Like those are the industries that we've seen have the most interest. Healthcare could be interesting, but I think the challenge with healthcare is you just got to be ready for the compliance piece, right? So I can see them being interested, but also kind of waiting a bit to kind of see these tools get the right amount of traction, get more use cases, get more case studies and customers under their belts before they bring us in. So, but yeah, when we went to market originally, it was a lot of financial services, media, and B2B SaaS.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Well, just to finish things off before we wrap up, yeah, I would love to see or hear from you. Really, what's next for Flip? What do you envision the next few years as happening? And yeah.
Yeah. So there's been a lot that's going on in the space. I mean, I am like we are all here at the right time, right? I think for AI. There's been so much work on the code gen side, and teams using all kinds of tools out there, et cetera. It is about time the SREs and developers got some love, right? Like that's what Flip is all about, right? So we've seen the developments. We've seen, I won't say specific tools, but we've seen a lot of these tools out there that are doing really cool stuff in terms of building applications. Now it's time to observe them, right? And it's time to automate that, right? It's time for SREs to not have to get woken up in the evenings, right? It's time for prediction of incidents. It's time for automation, right? Intelligence in your back pocket. Like that's the world that we're in. So I think for us, what you'll see come out of us over the next couple of months is more prediction, more automation. We've always tackled complexity, et cetera. Another thing that's kind of come out for us is we recently put our product out in GA. So anyone can go to our website, www.flip.ai, and they could sign up for a free trial and just try it, right? Like we're not hiding behind a paywall. You don't have to call the sales rep and all that stuff. Like it is free for the world to try. And we look forward to putting more out there.
Sounds like an exciting future indeed. Well, Corey, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate all the learnings you shared with me, with the watchers of this webinar, and yeah, looking forward to the future.
Thanks, Brian.